2-minute warning. We start in 2 minutes.
Councillor Middleton Hope, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Then we're in good. Thank you. Jeff, thanks for the cold.
Sorry, it was probably me, but blame Andre.
Okay, so
He started it.
Okay. Okay, it's 1:30. We're going to get ourselves started here right on time. Regardless of what Councillor Carlson says. We'll start with a roll call, please, Mr. Sarsfield.
Thank you. Councillor Crowson?
Here.
Councillor Carlson?
Present.
Councillor Dodick?
At present.
Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope?
present.
And also in attendance is Councillor Schmidt-Rempel. Quorum is established.
Perfect. We will then start with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Moving on, we will have an adoption of the agenda. I have a motion from Councillor Carlson. Almost. There, now I have a motion from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the agenda of the Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting of April 27, 2023 be adopted as presented. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any additions, changes?
18. 18? No.
None? Then I'll call for the vote.
Hold on.
Oh,
Councillor Middleton Hope, you have a question?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'd like to be removed as the mover on one of the items before this committee today.
Okay, so 5.1 will be open then for anyone to make a motion. I've already told the city manager he probably won't get his motion anyway, so I warned him. All right.
Good, thanks.
Okay, question's been called. All in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. Moving on to the consent agenda, I have a motion from Councillor Dodick. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting held on March 23, 2023 be approved and the chair and city clerk designate be authorized to sign the same. And further be it resolved that the status of initiatives for April 27, 2023 be received as information. Councillor Dodick.
Unless there are any questions, I would call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Moving us now to presentations. Mr. Sarsfield is doing double duty today because some of his colleagues are out. So he is going to be presenting on City Council Standing Policy Committees and the governance structure. It's only the motions that are recorded, so we'll have him back by then. Oh, so Mr. Brierley will introduce and then we'll hand it over to Mr. Sarsfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, in light of the comments at the beginning of the meeting, again, whatever committee and council decides on this is just fine with me. This is my doing. If you're looking for anyone to blame, it was just discussions over the last year with members of council and through our budget process, looking for opportunities for efficiency. And as noted in the report, it was reviewed with a lens for finding efficiency and adding clarity to which standing policy committee items would be brought forward. So clarity for members of the public and council, as well as scheduling, because as Mr. Sarsfield will likely touch on, there's been some committees might have an item on the agenda, some committees have been canceled. There's a lot of scheduling and work goes into it, and some continued comments that I've heard, members of council may have heard different from public about unclear what goes to which committee. If we look at the current committee structure, there's 6 committees. If we include advocacy, it is 7 committees. And so I tasked clerks with looking at an opportunity to potentially refine the number of committees to streamline that and present some opportunities for committee and council consideration. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sarsfield to walk members of committee through.
So thank you, committee, for giving me the opportunity to present on this topic, which is near and dear to my heart. So we'll start off with the first slide. So this was our structure prior to 2021, and it came about as a George Cuff review on governance back in 2003, and they recommended that we have a certain format, and this is the format that we ended up with. We had a community issues committee, which might have met about on average 4 times a year. We had a finance committee which met primarily just during the budget process. The audit committee was a committee which had been in place for a number of years. And finally, the Open and Effective Government Committee was, I believe, created in 2010 to provide a more open review of the governance structure and provide opportunity for people to speak. We had a governance review done in 2019. And part of that governance review, there were different recommendations made. If we go to the next slide. And part of that suggested that we go to a different structure of committees where they would be what are called standing policy committees. And those standing policy committees would provide a forum for individuals to come and to speak on any topic rather than appearing at council. Because before 2021, there was several times where there were members of the public speaking on a specific issue, and that would take up the entire agenda. So that was one reason why the Standing Policy Committee, allowing people to speak on any topic which they wish, and yet allow council meetings to be dealt with the actual governance of it. So as part of that structure, what came to be was initially 5 committees, and then it was extended to 6, and that was audit, civic works, I can't see, so culture, economic, and governance. So that's the structure we operated on. We did add audit after a year to make it a standing policy committee. And below that, you'll see the number of reporting structures for the different boards, committees, and commissions that we may have. So that's not what we're talking about today. We're just talking about the blue, the standing policy committee structure. So if we go, so based on it's been in operation now for 2.5 years, we thought maybe it's time to take a look at to see what would work, what's working and what's not working. And so we looked at other municipalities across Canada to see what kind of committee structure they had in place and what they were and what types and that sort of thing. And as a result, you have a proposal before you, if you go to the next slide, which reduces the number of committees, standing policy committees, to 3. And these names, don't feel beholden to these names. They're just really placeholders. But in effect, this is what they would represent. So we kept with economic and finance, and that role would be similar to what we have in place now for the economic committee. Depending on how many people you wish to sit on it, it would meet typically monthly and deal with the budget and deal anything with financial. So as we used, we like the phrase monetary, and then we tried to describe below what kinds of things would be included as monetary. In addition, we proposed that there be 2 other committees, governance. We liked the name that we had in place before, so we kept with it, and primarily it's dealing with intangibles. So that would be things that you can't necessarily describe, but provides a service to the community. So those are the kinds of things listed under governance. So it is sort of an amalgamation to some degree of the current governance. The audit functions are underneath here. In addition, some of the cultural functions are also under this particular committee. The third committee that is being proposed at this time, and remember, this is just a proposal. We can go to any number of committees or structures, but this is just a starting point, is assets and infrastructure, and how we describe this is something physical or tangible. So typically anything dealing with a building or with property that is not necessarily monetary. So for instance, if we wanted to talk about a condition of the runway at the airport, we would take it to the assets and infrastructure. If we were looking for money to build a new runway for the airport, then chances are we would be going to economic first. And once the budget's in place, then the details associated with that particular runway or any other buildings or properties that the city may own would be under those committee. So what is proposed, and again, this is subject to consideration of council, that the council will continue to meet twice monthly, every other Tuesday. Of course, that's up to council. The economic and finance, the assets and governance would meet monthly, and the schedule can be determined. When we looked at the different composition of these committees, we believe that the economic should consist of all of council as before, as currently. And in terms of the other two, it can vary. We propose different numbers, like 4 is an easy number on the other two committees, because then every council member would be serving on the economic, they'd be serving on council, and they'd be sitting on one other standing committee. So that's sort of the details. We can go into more as the questions arise, but that's what's proposed, and we really welcome the discussion. As I said, it's been 2 years since we've had what we have in place, and we thought we'd see what council's feedback is on the proposed structure.
Thank you, Mr. Sarsfield. So having heard the presentation, I know everybody over there is here for historic places, so I don't see any members of the public who are here to speak on this. We will move into, and I think not only questions, but discussion as well, because I'm sure there will be both. Councillor Dodick, if you'd like to start.
Excuse me for my voice, but Mr. Sarsfield, speaking historically, not historical society, but historically, we used to have the then Monday meetings that were known as CIC. And have you considered or have you looked at the possibility of your 3 SPC structure basically having sort of the same format of the CIC, so doing it on off Tuesdays, which would allow for the agenda to include any and all parts of the items referred to in the 3 SPCs that you have proposed. So what I'm saying is, if you have a situation where all members of council are involved in those 3 SPCs, but the agenda is determined by what issues are important on any given off Tuesday. So you might have governance issues that might take up 2 Tuesdays a month with nothing dealing with economic and assets and infrastructure, and maybe later on something dealing with assets and infrastructure and so on. So basically just having a system where members of council are involved in all the committees, all of these SPCs still allowing the public to present on, but the agenda being set by whatever agenda committee is for the SPCs, as well as allowing the public input as to what is set on the agenda. I may not have made it as clear as it could be, but basically what I'm saying is, from my perspective, it seems that 4-member council SPCs, where we recommend stuff to city council, seems to be a duplication of effort, where you get all members of city council sitting with SPC hats. At least they've all had an opportunity to then get the same information and be able, when it comes to council, to vote on it with the same information. Have you considered that?
So if I could answer, there's more than one answer to that question. So I'll do it in parts, and then you can tell me what I missed out on, if that's okay. And then the city manager can add on to whatever I've missed out. So when we looked at the structure, we were thinking that we wanted people the opportunity to speak. And so that's the reason why we attached a schedule, and so it gives some certainty to whoever's coming from the public or any certain submissions from external boards. We could, for instance, as you said, have two economics in the month of October, because that's when we're concerned with finance issues, in November, that sort of thing, and schedule governance throughout. But to provide consistency, we proposed initially that they meet once a month. That schedule could change depending on the number of items attached to it. Part of the issue associated with the committee structure is right now in the current bylaw, there is no delegation of authority. And so right now, anything the committee does always has to be passed on to council as a recommendation. It is not, they can't say we approve this, whatever it happens to be. It always goes as a recommendation to the council. The only saving grace is with the committee that people would be allowed to speak. So if you were to amend or propose that there be some delegation authority associated with the committees, then that may make some sense. But if it's all council for every committee, then I would thinking that you probably just want council meetings and be done with it.
Except, let me sort of back up on that statement. I mean, prior to when I was on council, this last term, Economic and Finance, SPC, sitting as Economic and Finance, SPC, sitting as 9 members of Economic and Finance, SPC, made a recommendation to City Council with respect to the approval of a budget, and City Council did not approve that budget.
Correct.
So I guess I don't see the same difficulty as you may when someone wearing a hat backwards recommending to someone wearing the hat frontwards, even though it's the same person with the same information, comes up with a different decision. But I hear where you're coming from. But so for what it's worth, based on the responses you've given, I do support the structure that you've recommended, as well as a fixed schedule to give some sort of certainty to the public as to what is, or at least what topics may be discussed at any given time. So for what it's worth, I do support that.
Councillor Middleton Hope.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks, Mr. Sarsfield, for putting this together. I know it was probably a lot of work.
So first of
I
all,
think the first question.
First of all, I'll correct you. I was not my work. I'll say it was a whole group of team effort. I just happened to be the face today because no one else is around.
Great. So it falls on your shoulders, and they're broad. I can see that from here. All right, David. What problem are we trying to solve here?
Depending on the we received different feedback, and one of the issues was there was uncertainty sometimes in where an issue was going to go, and sometimes an issue may end up going to more than one committee. So it might be going to the Cultural Committee for something specific, and then the ask would be for funds associated with that, so then it would end up with going to Economic and then finally to Council. So that was one issue. The second issue was that when we created the structure, it was an estimate on how the committee usages, how much time each one would take. And if you look at the statistics on how often some of the committees met, some of them, the majority of the meetings were canceled because there was no items on that particular agenda. So in an effort to provide some efficiency, reduce the number of meetings for council, for administration, and for the public, that was probably the main reason why this was proposed. Maybe the city manager would also like to add to that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Sarsfield. Yeah, that is exactly it, Councillor, it's with respect to trying to find some added efficiency and clarity for members of the public and for council in terms of scheduling what goes to which committee. And then if I might add to Councillor Dodick's comment about the delegated authority, and we used something like the budget, I would see that as complex, that in terms of delegated authority, where I was thinking of would be something of a less complex nature, lower value, that, you know, we see a number of things sometimes come by that are $1,500. Does that really need to go from committee where an economic and finance committee or other so named committee where we have 9 members to council, it could potentially be approved at committee, which adds an efficiency right there.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question would be in regards to, so can you characterize this as we're trying to streamline this process?
That's a good statement.
And who are we trying to streamline it for? Administration or council?
Or the public.
I would say all 3 bodies, administration, council, and the public.
Okay, one thing that I note, and perhaps you can address this, we talked about in terms of how many times we meet and how many times we've actually met, and I think that's good data, but at the end of the day, I'm wondering if you might have considered including all of the time that it takes to prepare for these meetings. I think, as well as my council members, my colleagues, everyone spends 10 to 15 hours per week going through this material and preparing for these committees. So I'm not sure that by reducing the number of committees, we're going to reduce that workload. And candidly, I really don't care to.
So was there a question?
There was. The question was, and so what do you think, David?
I think whatever council decides, it'll be the right decision.
All right, I'm done. Thanks, Madam Chair.
All right, Councillor Carlson.
Oh, thank you. Please make sure that's in the minutes, that whatever council decides is the right. Thanks, David and your team, city manager. Thanks for bringing this forward, because I think when I was part of the group that went down the path of the SPCs, and we kept saying, let's at least try it for a year or 2 or 3 to see how it feels. And I'm hearing there are some issues and concerns. So I appreciate the work done. Just a quick question. The recommended option is the one in front of us for the types of committees and the type of work they will do. Is there a recommended option on the meeting schedule? I didn't see that. I just saw several options.
So we would figure that out. So what typically would happen is if you decided today not to say you are or have to make a recommendation to council, and council says, yes, we think it's a wonderful idea, whatever it happens to be, it'll be put in the bylaw, and the council calendar would be produced at the October organizational meeting, depending on the timing, and that would actually have the details associated with it. So between now and October, end of October, they would come up with a schedule. You wouldn't put that kind of information necessarily in the bylaw, because as soon as you say it'll be held the second Wednesday of the month, then, well, that doesn't work for everyone. So next council may be the second Thursday. So we wouldn't put that kind of detail in the bylaw, but we would establish it each year through the council calendar, which is adopted by council at the organizational meeting.
And thank you for that, because it's always been sort of a struggle with me to figure out the council calendar recently. Only in as much as prior to moving to SPCs, when we had just our regular standing committees, OEG, governance, whatever they were, we could add meetings whenever we wanted or needed. If we got 4 hours through on a day, and then we said, can everyone show up in 4 days? Is everyone's next Tuesday open? We could just schedule a meeting. Now it's got to go to council, and we have to adopt change to the calendar and vote on that. Well, the meeting date's already passed. Like, why has it gotten so complex? Because I understand one of the cons is, 6 weeks between meetings, something might come up. Why can't we just say, let's have a meeting?
Can.
Okay.
But you have to follow the legislation. And so that's actually all we're doing. In the procedure bylaw, we're saying this is the legislation required in the MGA. You have to prescribe what the process is in your procedure bylaw, and if you want to hold a meeting within with less than 24 hours notice, then there's a special accelerated threshold that you have to meet to do that. So yes, you can. So the council calendar is a starting point, and it provides a guideline to everyone on what it's going to be for the next year. And actually, you're required to do that in the MJA, but we never did until we got our current city clerk, and she's more aware of certain things that others may not have been aware of.
Okay, so thank you, because that maybe helps me, because I probably wasn't aware of it either then. I assumed it was just for council meetings, but
So when we do the council calendar, you notice it also has the SPCs.
Yes.
Because the SPCs is prescribed in the procedure bylaw, and the rules for SPCs in terms of meetings, setting agendas and dates and all that sort of thing, it follows the same rules as council.
is that legislated that it has to, or is that just our procedure bylaw that could be changed?
We did that because of open transparency when the Open and Effective Government reviewed the procedure bylaw, and there's a subcommittee on it. That was one of the issues that was raised, that we need to provide notice, public notice to people so that they could attend. And if you remember with SPCs, we're trying to get public to come to those and have an opportunity to speak, as opposed to at council where they don't have the opportunity to speak. So that's the reason why it's done. We try and put deadlines in there, saying we're going to publish the agendas, for instance, a week ahead of time, so everyone sees what's coming up, so there's no big surprise to JAQ public, that they know what the issues are, and if they have something to say either for or against, they have that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So there are ways to solve, because one of the issues with going with the off Tuesdays to council meetings was that there were 6 weeks possibly between committee meetings. But if something was arising, we could
Yeah. So,
find ways to work around it rather than
Yeah.
waiting 2 weeks for a council meeting, having a vote, and then,
there are always ways.
okay. Excellent, thank you, I appreciate that. One of the issues, I think maybe it was Councillor Dodick that raised it and City Manager touched on, was the authority,
Delegated authority?
yes, for committees. Thank you, Madam Chair. And in past, committees used to have a budget. We created during our budget process that each committee had 80, no?
2 committees had budgets.
2 committees had budgets.
And they were in-
Environment and
pardon me?
OEG. Environment and OEG.
Yes, and so being a part of OEG and environment, you would be totally aware of that, but no other committee had budget.
No. But we could perhaps solve that issue of delegation by perhaps providing committees with a discretionary budget, so that, yeah, if somebody's coming in needing $80 to put up a sign on a pole,
You could.
On public property? Oh, sorry.
just, okay, thank you. I think
So you could, we looked at different ways to do delegation authority. We haven't talked about that. I haven't been asked, but I'm going to speak anyway, if that's okay.
please.
So, for instance, you could do based on a set amount. So like, for instance, in the financial policy number 2, it prescribes saying that the city manager has authority to spend up to $200,000 without getting approval necessarily of council. That's referring to a change in the capital budget. That could be a limitation. It could be based on something aligned to the signing authority policy, where things of a certain term or period, contract for less than a year or 2 years, whatever the period may be, those could also be delegated. There's lots of ways you could do it. But giving them each a budget might be a good starting point too.
Thank you. I think I'm good for right now, Madam Chair.
Okay, don't see anyone else in the queue, so I think, oh yeah, all those members of the public. So I think we will instead of actually bringing up a recommendation right now, I just want people to know we have options. We could accept the recommendation brought forward by admin. We could stay with status quo. We could suggest something in the middle. I do know some of the concerns that have been expressed about having number of meetings. Advocacy is not an SPC. Advocacy could be easily collapsed into economic or governance to free up that time. Some of the other concerns is that, community safety may not meet as much as people think, so we could collapse community safety into cultural and social and, get rid of one SPC that way and collapse people around. Another discussion, and I know I've had this with the city manager and others, audit quite often gets canceled. In some communities, they don't have a separate audit committee, they collapse that into economic. So those are some options that we could be looking at. The other thing, and you heard from Mr. Sarsfield, that we could be looking at delegation of authority that could solve some of these. So a certain amount of money could go to each of the SPCs, or if it's certain types of information. A lot of times when things come forward, it's in the middle, like we're just getting information on where things are. Is that something that could be delegated to the SPC going, we're accepting this for information, council will get the final thing? So it's things like that. The other conversation that is people have been having is how many people should be on any of the SPCs. Originally, we chose 4 because that's not quorum, so it's not actually a decision of council if you have only the 4. So that's why 4 was chosen, but it could be full, they could all be full council members on there or some other combination of those. The one thing that you'll notice pre-2021, there was no public input at anyone. That's one of the things SPC has in there. And going back to delegation of authority, it was always planned to have delegation of authority at committees, but that was one of the things we wanted to test out, how much council would feel comfortable once they got to know SPCs. Because it was such a new concept, it kind of freaked people out that, you know, everybody, at the time it was being discussed, the council at the time wanted final say on everything. But is that the most efficient way of doing things? Likely not. So would we be looking then at delegating certain things to the committees? All the information goes to council, but not necessarily debated at council. So those are just some of the things we could be looking at in the fluid area here. We can make decisions now. We can send it to our next meeting in May if people need to think. Just some of the options that are possible, and I'm sure there's more as well. Councillor Carlson, you are for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll step out for now because I'm.
You're thinking?
Yes.
Councillor Dodick, are you still thinking, or do you have a thought?
No, I'm actually prepared to sponsor a resolution to at least send it to council. And the resolution would be along the lines of what the recommendation shows up on the agenda package. There's some blanks that need to be filled in, so item 1A would be as set out there. B would be establish membership as all members of council. And number 2, direct administration to prepare, where it says the word option, I would say attachment 2B, which is page 16 of 18 of the package, which shows the city council meeting on Tuesdays, finance and economic on Wednesdays, and asset and infrastructure and governance on the Thursdays as indicated. And the reason I would do this is that it would at least give a blueprint or to council, and I can see people voting against it, but just to have something before council at the next council meeting to have a discussion between 9 members versus the 4 of us here. So
Well, 5.
that's the resolution I'm prepared to sponsor in terms of a recommendation to council for
Okay.
consideration.
So we have now a motion on the floor. Councillor Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope. Oh, number of meetings? Sorry, was
Yeah,
it
it's
monthly
4
meetings?
more.
Sorry, one thing, just right, Deputy Mayor.
It is the same as shown as on page 16, which has the finance and economic once a month, assets and infrastructure once a month, governance once a month, and of course, city council off Tuesdays, or Tuesdays, every second Tuesday. So basically, page 16 of 18.
Sarsfield's rapidly typing that down.
Mine was easier. Mine was 1C, 2B1.
Yeah, except I don't, for some reason, mine didn't print this one.
See, now I can't go for that.
That's it.
Neither one.
Neither one.
No, I gave you my recommendations. All right, Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is in regards to debate. Excuse me. I'm wondering if there is an option, an opportunity here that perhaps might be considered as well, and it would have to be obviously at the council level. I'm thinking in terms of if we made an amendment to this in any way, shape, or form, could it be at the end of term? I think that 2 years may not be enough time in any event as a sort of a secondary observation, may not be enough time to ensure that we've had the opportunity to soak this in, to feel it, to manipulate it, to manage it, to live with it. And I'm thinking that another 2 years, effectively to the end of this term, might give us a different perspective than we currently seem to be moving towards today. So that would be my portion of the debate. I'd like not to support this simply because for the reasons that I've just stated. I'm satisfied with the process that we have currently. I'd like to give it some more time. Thank you.
Councillor Carlson.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'm not sure if we have a motion on the floor. I imagine so. Are we in debate?
We're still in discussion
Okay,
because we'll see
good.
how that one goes. That's what SPCs are for, is for discussion.
Okay, and thank you for that, and I appreciate Councillor Dodick bringing an option forward. It's not the one I was thinking of. I liked the option. It sort of is a throwback option to the old CIC, having sort of defined agenda topics for each. So it would be the three SPCs that are outlined as the recommended option, but meeting alternate Tuesdays. One of the other challenges that I don't think has been brought up is with SPCs, because we have other commitments, we sit on other boards, et cetera, other duties outside of council and our SPCs, is they sometimes conflict. Take last week, for example, we had an economic SPC that first got canceled and then suddenly reappeared in my calendar, but it was an hour earlier than we had been scheduled. And so trying to work around those things with my other committee appointments, et cetera, is sometimes a challenge. Keeping it on the Tuesdays takes that out of the equation for me, because then Tuesdays I just would book absolutely nothing in, and it would always either be a council meeting or an SPC. So I like that. I do like having the three just always on Tuesdays. I know that's a 6-week rotation, but Mr. Sarsfield has said that that challenge is something that can always be fixed if we want to say, okay, we need another 2 hours on this. When's everyone good? Next Thursday? Let's all meet. So I think that solves that solution to me. The third point, I really don't like having committee of the whole on that, because it doesn't help spread the work around, or it doesn't help provide focus. What I enjoyed when we went to our previous committees, OEG, governance, environment, et cetera, and our current SPCs, is that we have a chair and a deputy chair that are really on top of monitoring things, and that is not their sole focus, but their main focus as the chair is to make sure that the work of the committee is progressing along. If you're the mayor and you chair every committee and it's agenda review committee, you're not focused in one area. You're doing too many jobs. So those are my takes. I'd like to go to the three. I'd like to have them scheduled on Tuesdays, and I'd like it to be 4 members of council on each of those, except finance, which could be a committee of the whole. Those are my thoughts.
Lots of thoughts, yes. So your main concerns are the date. You'd want them on Tuesdays. Is there any reason that SPCs as standing could not be moved to Tuesdays from Thursdays? Right? Would you need to change it to make what Councillor Carlson's concerns are? Whomever.
Looking at Mr. Sarsfield, I can't think of.
It doesn't really matter what day for us. Well, it does, but we'll figure it out.
My favorite quote is, "Things you can't necessarily describe as governance." We are the nobody knows what we do committee. All right, I don't see anybody else in the queue, but I'm getting the feeling that the motion will not be passing as. Well, and what I'm going to suggest is that we take this, send what we have to council, but put this on governance for next month, because it took a year and a half to create the SPCs that we have today. This just came forward today, and I think we need to think through some of the issues and concerns and to talk about it. So if we just pass for information that this is a continuing conversation onto council and hit it again next month, would that work?
I would prefer, well, no, I will, bring a resolution. It'll be modified slightly, because I will now use Councillor Carlson's dates, which would be 2.2, page 17, versus the other one. And the only reason I'm doing that is, you know, you're probably going to get the same resolution, but I want council to see it sooner rather than later. There's a recommendation that will be defeated by a vote of 3-1. Or is it- That's right. And
Well, they'll be
then,
getting it regardless. Even if it fails, they'll be getting it because it's a motion on the floor. But I still think we pass this on to next month's governance and have a more fulsome conversation. You have to remember that even though only 4 voting members, we do have Councillor Schmidt-Rempel here who is listening in, and the others can always attend. And you'll see many of us do attend meetings that were not necessarily on the committee because of interest. So there's the voting members, but that never stops any member from council from actually knowing what's going on.
I appreciate that, but I am going to propose that resolution, and it'll be voted down, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Great. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope, you have something to add? If not,
I have. Thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing that option forward. That gives me a level of comfort. I think if we are able to have some time for reflection and an opportunity to review the material more carefully. This is a year and a half in the works, and we're being asked to make a decision inside of an hour. So I like the option of being able to put this over to the next SPC and have a more fulsome discussion about the complexities and the nuances of this particular proposal.
Yeah, because we don't have any members of the public here. We haven't talked to them. I know that we don't have dogs on the agenda, so we don't have a full audience today. Always get.
Okay, fine, I withdraw my resolution. You can send it to the next governance.
Okay. I will wear you down eventually.
Well, you know where I'm heading anyways.
Yes, and you know where I'm heading. I think we can find a way to create the efficiencies without completely changing everything, but we'll see.
Want change. I want it now.
I have about 5 cents if you want change, yeah. All right, I see everybody is in the queue, but I'm going to recommend as chair that our motion be that we refer this to our next meeting of governance to let our council members know what is being discussed thoroughly in the meantime, but to have a more fulsome debate and conversation at the May governance. That is a formal motion I'm going to make. Councillor Carlson, you look like you're crying.
I'm just trying to figure out how we involve the 4 members of council who aren't hearing this today.
The motion will be going to them, right? It'll be on the consent agenda, so they'll be well aware. And I think we just make an extra effort to invite them to our next meeting.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we have a section in our council agenda, either council updates or committee reports. Maybe
Do a report there.
that would be
So
just
you're giving me more work then?
yes.
All right, Councillor Dodick?
Yes, I have a question of Mr. Sarsfield. So if I were to vote to send this for governance, and this will come back as a report to City Council at the next council meeting, nothing precludes me at that time for bringing my own resolution to have the resolution that I'm no longer bringing at the SPC actually before council. Am I not correct in that?
You're always correct.
Thank you.
Is he correct or accurate? Of Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Yes.
You're in my queue, so I'm wondering if you have anything to add. If not, I'll call the vote on moving this to our next governance meeting.
Please do.
Okay. Question has been called. All in favor? All right, passes unanimously, though we may get surprised at the next meeting.
Ah,
Councillor Dodick rested up way too much in Japan. All right. That ends the debate on the presentation, so we move to submissions. And this is why we have so many members of Historic Places Advisory Committee here, is because their submission, and the submission is to approve some amendments to their terms of reference, but to also then request that a bylaw be created around their terms of reference. And most of the changes come from who the voting members are and descriptions of the voting members. But we do have Mr. Kilgore and members of the committee here if there are any questions for them. Somebody please ask them a question. They had to sit through that earlier debate.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just ask a question. It's probably not to the committee representatives that are here, perhaps, or perhaps it is. But if I understood it in my reading, this is to formalize the committee as a committee of council. But there still would not be a member of council on the committee, correct? It's just a committee that would report to council. So what is the difference exactly?
That's correct. So it would be a standing committee, which was our understanding was the status of HPAC up to this point. But we were advised by City Solicitor's Office that a bylaw is required to establish them formally as a standing committee. So there wouldn't be any change in terms of council being on that committee.
So it's basically would be the formalization of what was always assumed, but this would make it in fact a reality.
That's correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And what's your favorite building in Lethbridge? Just to put you on the spot.
All right. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this question, it's actually a statement and then we'll go into a question. I said, no sooner have we been asked to review a new SPC model. This is a request to create a new committee. So are we suggesting that we need more committees and fewer SPCs?
I don't believe it's the request to create a committee because these guys have been operating since 2007 as a committee. It's just we keep getting reminded by the city solicitor that our committees need to have bylaws and need to be more formalized. So I think so some changes in the terms of reference, and then they want to use those amended terms of reference to make the backbone of the bylaw.
So then I guess perhaps Mr. Kilgore can just enlighten me a little bit in terms of how are the preservation of historic buildings managed now? Will this change it, or is this just simply procedural in terms of establishing a policy that heretofore has been lacking?
Thank you, Councillor. It would be the latter, yes. So it wouldn't change anything in terms of how the committee operates or how it has operated in the past 15 or 16 years. So it's just kind of an administrative change to make sure that we're in compliance with the MGA.
Okay, last question then. Are all positions filled on this committee currently? Do we have difficulty getting people to sit on this committee?
We currently have one position vacant that's been tricky to fill, and that's for the Heritage Specialist Indigenous member. And so we have had that vacant now, I think, for about a year or so. And so we'd love to have any applications for that position if anyone can think of anyone.
Have we thought in terms of removing that condition from that committee?
That has not been considered, no.
You might want to consider it then if we're having difficulty. If it's a need to fill that position and we don't seem to be able to fill it, I'm sure we could do one of two things. We could go out and actively solicit people to apply, and barring success in that area, perhaps we just simply say the conditions under which this particular position exists may not be a condition that we can meet.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take that feedback back to the committee.
Thank you.
Councillor Jodic?
Actually, my question follows up on Councillor Middleton Hope's. The positions, 4 of the 5 positions proposed are sort of generic. Architect can be anybody. There's no ethnicity associated with it. The same thing with citizen at large, Lethbridge Historical Society representative, heritage specialist. So if we're having difficulty filling the Indigenous person requirements of the prior makeup of the committee, I do know that there are, for example, professors or people with knowledge who may not be Indigenous themselves, but may have the expertise, as defined here, academic or applied perspective in Indigenous heritage issues. So my question is partly to you and partly to the city solicitor. Would it not seem at least appropriate from a human's right position saying that we identify that position as a generic as well, simply saying a person with expertise of and so on, Indigenous heritage issues. So it doesn't require a specific ethnicity or heritage background, but simply knowledge-based, which all of the others require as well. Is that something that you might be prepared to consider?
Thank you, Councillor. So I guess I could provide a bit of background on how these positions came about, and maybe City Solicitor's Office wanted to add anything. So originally, HPAC was just the 3 members, the architect, the public member, and a representative of Lethbridge Historical Society. The other 2 positions came about when the Reconciliation Implementation Plan was adopted, and that had a number of recommendations in there that were based on interpreting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action at the municipal level. And so that recommended adding in these 2 additional members to provide that expertise around Indigenous heritage. And so as we've kind of expanded our scope of our heritage program to include Indigenous historic places, there was the need to have that Indigenous representation on there. The feeling being that we didn't want to be making decisions around Indigenous heritage if we didn't have some actual Indigenous representation on the committee.
That seems to be an argument form over substance. You're not being able to fill the position pursuant to the recommendations of the Reconciliation Committee recommendations. So instead, it seems to me that we're just sort of saying, well, look, we're trying to follow the form of it, but in substance we can't do it because we've not been able to fill it with an Indigenous person. So I'm suggesting that if you want someone with the academic or applied perspective, you can certainly open it up to everyone and certainly make a preference and say hope and that an Indigenous person applies. But it seems to me that if they're not applying, then the second best thing in still complying with the tenor of the reconciliation recommendations is to have someone with that background and knowledge and perspective sit on the committee. So that's all I'm suggesting here. I'm saying if you can't fill it, at least you can go halfway there by filling it with someone with at least knowledge. So those are my thoughts.
Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just one question I had is there were 2 routes explored. One was a committee of council, one was an administrative committee. I kept seeing administrative committee not recommended, but no explanation given as to why. Because it does seem to be more of an administrative committee, but in my mind, but perhaps I'm missing something.
Thanks, Councillor. So there was a bit of discussion back and forth between myself and City Clerk's office and City Solicitor's office. The ultimate feeling was that the way that HPAC is operated up till now most closely fits the description of a standing committee. So there's three main parts to it. Their members have always been appointed by resolution of City Council, which is not the case for an administrative committee. Their terms of reference have always been approved by City Council, which is, again, not the case for administrative committee. And HPAC fits the description of a committee of council, which is, quote, an ongoing committee established by City Council that shall continue until terminated by a City Council resolution. And so HPAC were established by Historic Places Policy CC33.
Okay, and thank you for that. So, but what I heard from that is most of the reasons were just because it has always been thus, and so it shall always be thus, rather than a real reason. And so I'm just, what are the challenges of it being an administrative committee? Because I think in my mind, it most fits with an administrative, providing advice to when we're doing plans, et cetera. So maybe help me why it would be a challenge as an administrative committee, and I'm not sure if anyone can answer that.
You have to remember, they're the only group that can advise us to set a bylaw for a building, right? So if you're going to protect something, and that's council's role, the only one they can do. So this is, they have a mixture of admin and council, but that role as the advisor on whether a bylaw should be created is this committee, and that would have a direct link to council.
But I guess my thought was, and thank you, Madam Chair, for helping with that, was that advice could be provided to administration, and that would then come forward to council.
I don't think you want to take the experts out of it and give it to administration to come forward. I wouldn't recommend that, as somebody who actually is
That
from
on
the
that
heritage part.
Okay.
And we're not debating, but I would.
No, I appreciate, because it was flummoxing to me, so I appreciate the insights from folks who have been on it in the past.
Been on it, just actively involved.
Okay, thank you.
I just get to appoint one person. You have had a challenge of trying to get somebody, which is why I think you changed E. E was very much archaeology, anthropology. You've opened it up to anybody with a heritage specialist, so you've opened that one up rather. And with C, I know it's not the only thing, but it's also one of the reasons, just to remind my colleagues, that we're looking for honorariums, because it is getting harder to get people to volunteer for committees across the board. We see it from the sports committees, we see it from all kinds, and it's one of the reasons that at the budget we brought forward the honorariums. That policy is still coming forward, but we may see for quite a few of our BCCs more people willing to step forward. It's a small honorarium, but at least it is a way of thanking volunteers that we haven't previously in the past. So that may be able to address some of those issues about people not coming forward. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope, you're back in the queue. Did we lose him? We did. All right, you came back at the perfect time, Deputy Mayor.
There we go.
The floor is yours.
No, I just simply wanted to make you aware that I couldn't hear. If we were putting forward a motion or something, I would have to rely on the overhead screen. So I'm good to go now.
Okay, we haven't actually brought forward a motion, but we do have one that is coming forward from Councillor Dodick, if he's okay with it. No? Okay, so we have an open motion. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council, 1, approve the amendments as provided in attachment 2, and 2, direct administration to prepare bylaw to formalize Historic Places Advisory Committee as a committee of council. So would either the Deputy Mayor or Councillor Carlson be okay with bringing that forward?
I'll get it on.
Bring it to the table?
Bring it to the table so we can debate.
Carve it up and digest it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Councillor Dodick has Councillor Carlson has brought forward that motion. Is there debate on the motion per se? Councillor Carlson, do you want to start debate?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it coming forward. I appreciate us discovering the gap, that it's sort of been operating in a gray zone. And I think it's time to formalize it one way or the other. That's why I was trying to figure out whether administrative committee versus committee of council is the way to go. I guess what I heard is that it hasn't been broke, it's working well, and to continue working well, we should formalize it through a bylaw so that it's actually actual. I'll put it that way.
So the city solicitor's department is happy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I'll bring this forward.
All right.
Be keen to hear some debate on this.
Deputy Mayor, debate?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like, and I don't know whether it would be a friendly amendment or not, but the discussions that we were having in regards to placing people on this committee, soliciting support and so forth, does not appear to be as a part of that. Now, maybe this isn't the right place for it. Maybe we just simply go ahead and we vote on the motion as it is, but I really would like that piece to be included, whether it's later on in administration's review of this, of the development of the policy, so that we can identify people who have the expertise and have the interest to sit on this committee. Thank you.
Okay, so that it is a two-part motion. So you were having concerns about the proposed amendments. Are you okay with the second part about formalizing it as a committee of council under the bylaw?
I'm sorry I don't see it. There we go. Thanks.
So your concern is the first one, the amendments, your concern is with maybe opening up the Heritage Specials Indigenous, or at least referring that back to the committee to look at again?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know whether this is the appropriate location, but I'm just wondering, since we have the president of the Lethbridge Historical Society here, I'm just wondering if there isn't somebody from that group that might be coerced, cajoled, encouraged to participate.
I will change hats quickly. I will just say that we do have one member of the LHS on there, but the Indigenous member is somebody who it's a very specialized one, and the difficulty was the city hired the person who was on there. So maybe if the city would stop hiring all the good people.
Yeah, sure. We want to hire just the bad people. I agree.
But that's the difficulty, is people get on these committees, is learn how incredibly talented they are, and if they're of an age that they are looking for employment, that's how we sometimes lose them, is the city actually hires them. So I don't think it's for lack of trying to get somebody there. It's for other reasons, I believe.
Right. So in terms of the point one, if that, from my perspective, I would have a greater comfort level if that was amended to reflect the conversation. I'm not going to wordsmith this right now because, as you can hear, I am plugged up and I'm feeling kind of bad. So I'll let someone else do that then. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Dodick.
Excuse me, I'm not going to support the resolution, either one or two. And the reason for that was that if we're having a difficulty in filling a position, specifically with an Indigenous person, with academic or applied perspective in heritage issues, it seems to me not disingenuous, but like I said earlier, a form over substance kind of situation, so that I may be the only one voting against this, but at council, if council sees to address it at the next council meeting, I will make an amendment suggesting that we not specify ethnicity, but rather competence in a particular area, as we did with the other 4 representatives. So that's why I can't support the resolution as presented.
Back to you, Councillor Carlson.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Dodick. Maybe I can ask, because I'm not sure we got a fulsome response to that question, because it seems to me it's just as Councillor Dodick said, the ethnicity in the description of the position, the Heritage Specialist Indigenous Representative. It says an Indigenous person with expertise. I'm wondering what the committee's thoughts are on just a person with expertise in Indigenous cultures, and even saying that preference would be given to an Indigenous person, but that way, as Councillor Dodick says, you get the person with the knowledge, even though you may not get an Indigenous member every time, but the goal would be to work towards that. What would be the challenge of that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I can start off, and then if any members of the committee would like to add to that. So I believe the reasoning behind it being an Indigenous person is around the sensitivity around Indigenous heritage that we're just starting to work on for the first time. There's a lot of concern among the Indigenous community about, ownership of their heritage and not kind of stepping on their toes and putting a foot wrong. So we want to make sure we continue to build that relationship with them and make them comfortable. Certainly there's a lot still to be worked out on how we work on their historic places within the city, even following the Heritage Management Plan being adopted. But I think there would be a lot of concern if we removed that requirement to have an actual Indigenous person on that committee able to speak about their own heritage.
Even though we only get to debate once? Mr. Cool. Oh, we'll let Mr. Cool have an answer, and then we'll get to you, Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope. He pushed the button. George pushes a lot of buttons.
Try not to. Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair, and more specifically, Councillor Carlson. I think one of the key factors here in terms of Indigenous representation, it takes a while and it's relationship based. And so we all know, I think, with our growing experience in working with Indigenous communities, is that those things have to be established. Trust has to be established, and I think we're making headway in that area. And I think that as we go further down that path, I think we'll encounter people who will be more willing to devote some of their time to this committee. We have requirements on several city committees for Indigenous representation, so I don't think this is the only committee that has difficulty finding that kind of representation. So I think we just have to be patient, but I think it's a good idea to retain that position.
Deputy Mayor? Your second debate?
Actually, it's just a question. I guess it's twofold. How many locations exist in the city that require this type of expertise? And is the person that we currently have on this committee not capable of either managing the workload or not capable of demonstrating the skill sets? So I guess that would be back to Mr. Kilgore.
Thank you, Councillor. So the way that we've been working with Indigenous heritage sites to date is we've identified a number of them through the traditional knowledge and use assessment. None of those have been designated as municipal historic resources because we're still not sure if that's the right approach to take. Certainly it works very well for buildings which are on discrete parcels with land titles to attach that designation to, and somebody usually living in the building or running a business there to look after it. With Indigenous heritage sites, it can be more complicated because they can be on public land or somebody else's land. They can be very vulnerable sites that we don't even know if we want to draw attention to them by designating them. And so really that question of how we recognise and protect those types of sites is still an open question that's part of the follow-on work from the Heritage Management Plan. So currently we have a number of sites identified through the TKUA, none designated. There are provincial and federal designations related to, for example, the Battle site. The expertise that we have on the committee right now, what's currently called the archaeologist or anthropologist position, is a person who has some expertise in Indigenous heritage, although it's more around South American Indigenous heritage, but certainly she has some expertise in more of our local Indigenous heritage as well. But certainly we'd like to fill that other position as well. The Indigenous position has been filled by, I believe, 2 people in the past. So we certainly have managed to fill it in the past, and so we're just looking for that next person at the moment.
What about the Archaeological Society?
Certainly I could reach out to them and see if they have someone.
It seems a natural. I mean, I've been on several digs with them, and there are some incredibly talented people who are sensitive for history in general, and I think that might be perhaps a response. I'm not going to say an answer. I'm going to just say a response. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kilgore. I haven't debated it, but I'm going to strongly recommend that we do not remove the Heritage Specialist Indigenous. Within the heritage community, there is a strong recognition that nothing about us without us. And not to include somebody who has an Indigenous background, it's not just the knowledge. You can learn the knowledge. It is that relationship, it is the knowledge of the Blackfoot language, it is having the family connections, it's knowing the proper elders. There is something there that, we were talking earlier about intangible, that is intangible and absolutely necessary. As we pass the Heritage Management Plan, and if you look at it, the amount of Indigenous knowledge that is within Lethbridge that we have never properly explored is partly because we haven't made the deliberate effort in heritage communities to ensure that Indigenous members are part of the conversation and are helping to lead the conversation. It is a new way of thinking in the heritage field, and the heritage field has moved ahead with it a lot more than other communities have. But it would be moving us backwards and be moving us, in my mind, in the wrong direction if we don't leave this in here. We have to understand that based on the quorum this committee has, they can continue working on other areas without that member, but they cannot work without that member when they're looking at Indigenous history. So I would strongly recommend that we have the recommendation as in there instead of moving forward. Mr. Sanchez, you just popped in. Were you listening online?
Yes, sorry I was in another meeting and couldn't be here at the very beginning. Just logging into Teams and I listened to the conversation and I just wanted to chip in. I just talked to Mr. Kilgore. Just a quick comment. The way the committee works, we still have the quorum, right? So this position is not a position that we require immediately. We can still perform and do the work that we are doing. And that's probably one of the reasons to why it has been still pending to get the right person. It doesn't mean that we need this to meet the requirements, but ideally, yes, if we have one person right now, that will be the preference. But if we don't have that person, we can still perform until we get that condition. I also heard the comments about changing some of the requirements, and I will say that my recommendation is to wait a little bit more until we have a certain time. I don't know exactly for how long, but at least a few months. And if we don't get that, I will be one of the first that will come back and then make that recommendation to council to amend and make the scope broader so we can have a different option there.
Okay, so you want some time. All right, so we go back then to Councillor Carlson, to your motion. Do you remember your motion? Yes. Okay, we've had second breakfasts and second debates, but I think we're back to your motion.
And I believe the motion, Chair, I believe the motion stands that the recommendation to accept the amendments as well as to create the bylaw. So
Yes, that is the formal
I
amendment.
think we've had a good fulsome debate. Let's call the vote and see where it goes from here.
Question's been called. All in favor? Councillor, Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope, we don't know if you're in favor or against. And now you're mute.
Thank you. Not in favor.
Not in favor? All right, so in favor was 2, opposed would be 2. So it goes forward as a non-recommended to council. All right. Thank you to the members of the Historic Places Advisory Committee who got to sit through your first debate and your second debate. And we move now to something which will not at all be controversial, the signs debate and conversation. And we have a motion from Councillor Carlson, but we're not quite sure what your motion is yet.
And thank you, Madam Chair. One of the reasons that I think you were a co-sponsor of this at council, that this came forward when it did was to act before the provincial election, to sort of see any road bumps or challenges or advantages, disadvantages to removing or not allowing election signs on public property, public right-of-ways specifically. I believe that ship has sailed. I actually watched a couple of videos of local candidates unboxing their signs today, so I think any change made now would be really impactful on the...
He gets
Yes.
bored. He watches videos of people opening sign boxes.
And cats, yes, and dogs. And so I don't know that there's much rush. I guess my thought is we can take some time with this. We could actually monitor, and maybe my question will be to Mr. Sarsfield, because I think he did a lot of the work. Oh, you're trying to escape, weren't you, David? I'm sorry. A lot of the background work on this, but a few communities have actually gone down this road. Is that correct?
We're not aware of any community that has passed anything as of yet.
In Alberta, but other communities out, or communities out.
Again, we're not aware of any community has done this yet.
Oh,
There are
How's
various
debating it?
ones which have proposed to do them, but they have not completed the process.
I thought that was in Alberta because I think there are some municipalities in Ontario.
There was, but they have also not completed the process last time I checked. I haven't checked this week, so maybe something happened this week.
Well, I was busy watching unboxing videos, so I didn't check myself. So I'm wondering, rather than barreling headlong into something, usually I'm a little less risk averse and like to jump headlong into things. But there are other communities that are actually going to tackle this, and it's on their agenda. They're moving forward. I'm wondering if it may be wise to just sort of sit back, because as Madam Chair mentioned to me earlier, there's been talk of constitutional or charter challenges to these types of things. And so it may be smart to sort of sit back for 6 months and see what's happening in the rest of the country. But those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear the committee's thoughts.
All right, does anyone have a thought?
I agree.
As do I.
Okay, so if that is your formal motion to refer it back to ourselves for Q3 or Q4?
Yeah, I'm thinking in September may be a good time. That's about 5 months, 6 months, maybe October, November, maybe a good time to revisit. And perhaps in the interim, if any of us or city clerk sees that another community has actually moved forward, to keep us in the loop.
Okay, so, Mr. Sarsfield, do you have that motion down? That refer it to Q4?
Correct.
Keep kicking it down the road if you want. Sometimes punting is an option, especially if you don't want to get sued.
So just for information, the drop dead date would be January 1st, 2025.
Drop dead. Huh. Who are you talking about?
I've got it penciled in 56, 57.
All right, so the motion before us is to refer this back to us for Q4 2023. All in favor? That's the only thing that's passed unanimously today. Oh, this will also pass unanimously. We're now adjourned.
Sorry, you all had to show up.